Management teams often make a fatal miscalculation. They identify a critical business risk on a whiteboard, call a meeting, and immediately approve a massive budget to build the full product. The instinct is to mobilize engineers and sales teams instantly. They assume that because they named the risk out loud, throwing a multi-million-dollar budget at it will solve it. But spotting a potential failure point in a boardroom does not mean you have mathematically or practically eliminated it in the real world. Moving straight from a concept to a final polished product is rarely strategic execution. It is uncalculated financial speculation. When you apply massive capital prematurely, any hidden flaw in the logic causes the entire structural weight of the business model to collapse under real-world pressure. To prevent this type of financial destruction, we rely on a structural sequence known as a validation roadmap. This chart maps the framework. Validation is an engineered hierarchy of experiments, converting beliefs into hard evidence with minimum capital. Notice the progression. It climbs sequentially from low-cost problem validation at the bottom up to high-cost economic validation at the top. To understand exactly how these strict go, no-go checkpoints operate in practice, we can deconstruct a real-world infrastructure case study. True de-risking requires a rigorous sequential protocol of behavioral experiments. Consider a business-to-business solar engineering company. They developed a concept for a solar-as-a-service subscription, a model designed specifically for small to medium factory owners. The initial projections demanded 5 million baht upfront to stockpile hardware inventory and build out a proprietary software platform to handle the billing. Before spending a single baht on hardware, the project enters stage 1 of the validation roadmap, customer validation, also known as proof of problem. The ironclad financial rule of stage 1 is that the experiment must utilize the absolute minimum capital structurally possible. In this scenario, the consulting team froze the 5 million baht budget. Instead, they authorized a mere 10,000 baht to print conceptual brochures, using them to anchor interviews with target clients. The interview psychology was highly specific. Instead of asking factory owners if they would buy a hypothetical solar subscription, the team asked how they currently manage high energy costs and what they currently pay to solve it. The immediate feedback was overwhelmingly positive. 18 out of 20 factory owners expressed intense interest in a service that promised 10% energy savings without an upfront purchase. This high ratio of positive feedback clears the first checkpoint. The data confirms the pain point exists and the target market cares about the solution. But verbal interest is still just a belief. It lacks the friction of true financial evidence, which means the model must advance to the next gate. Stage 2 is solution validation. The objective here is to test operational feasibility and prove that the client is actually willing to pay for the mechanics of your solution. The consulting team executed a $0 stress test. They took a drafted service contract back to the same 18 interested factory owners. The mechanical tool utilized here was a letter of intent. They demanded the factories sign a document legally committing them to a 15-year service term. This marks a critical shift in the testing protocol. We are no longer collecting stated intent. We are demanding behavioral evidence that forces the client to expend real organizational friction. The result of this checkpoint was a complete shutdown. Exactly 0 out of the 18 highly interested clients were willing to sign the letter. The mass rejection revealed a hidden structural reality.
Small and medium factory owners generally rent the land their facilities sit on. Look at the overlap in these timelines. The required solar commitment runs for 15 years, but a typical land lease expires in 5. The clients refuse to accept the massive penalty risk of relocating halfway through the solar contract. The enthusiasm from stage 1 completely vanished when confronted with the behavioral reality of stage 2. Identifying this legal and feasibility gap via a free contract test directly prevented the company from burning 5 million baht on solar panels they could never install. A failed validation checkpoint acts as a systemic safeguard, forcing a pivot before the company destroys its remaining capital. Instead of abandoning the underlying technology, the failed test triggered a strict operational pivot. The team adjusted a single parameter. They changed the target market entirely, shifting focus from small renters to mid-sized factory owners who held the deeds to their own land. Assuming this new demographic successfully navigates the first 2 checkpoints, the project advances to the final gate, Stage 3, Business Model Validation. The goal of Stage 3 is to prove the business can scale profitably. This is done by launching a restricted, small-batch pilot project in a live market environment. This funnel visualization highlights the critical mathematical metric for this stage, customer acquisition cost, or CAC. We need to verify exactly how much money it takes to secure a single signed contract. That acquisition cost is then weighed directly against the projected lifetime value, or LTV, of that specific customer over the duration of their contract. The final checkpoint dictates a strict gating rule. The lifetime value must significantly outweigh the acquisition cost, ideally at a 3-to-1 ratio, proving the model generates more cash than it burns. Only when this final mathematical ratio is definitively proven positive does management unlock and deploy the heavy 5 million baht scaling budget. Surviving Stage 3 strips the speculation out of the project. It upgrades an executive assumption into a highly efficient, capital-generating economic engine. Standard corporate planning usually aims to prove a project's potential, but the validation roadmap operates by a different set of rules. The framework is engineered to discover exactly where your logic is flawed as cheaply as possible, rather than proving your assumption right. This staged approach lets a business absorb catastrophic flaws, pivot, and maintain momentum without exhausting its budget. However, the structural mechanics of the roadmap are completely useless without strict, emotionally detached operational discipline from the management team. First, success criteria must be locked in before any testing begins. Second, verbal compliments are ignored. Only measurable behavioral data dictates progress. Third, executives must honor the raw data over their own egos, even when the market rejects their favorite idea. Fourth, every single experiment must be strictly time-boxed to force rapid execution. And finally, the most difficult cultural rule: the organization must actively reward the teams that kill doomed projects early, rather than punishing them for a failed concept. But validation only gets you to the starting line. Once a model survives all checkpoints and enters the live execution phase, it steps into a highly volatile, unpredictable environment. The static checkpoints and low-cost tools used to build the model are no longer sufficient to track its daily survival in the open market. Keeping a validated business alive requires shifting away from static checklists and mastering the dynamic difference between leading and lagging metrics.